I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us a brand new guest. I was reading one of his articles about the about the World Government Conference that was happening in the Middle East, and I just want to read you a little bit about. He is a contractor with the New American Magazine, a contributor to WND and more. He's written for lots of newspapers and magazines. He's been a guest on Mike Savage, Alex Jones, Newsmax, One American News, CBC. He writes a lot of stuff that concerns Christians. I'm talking about Alex Newman, journalist Alex Newman. Hey, Alex, you're a brand new guest. Thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Greg. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, very kind of a big fan of yours. I saw your article about the world government, which I don't want to start there. I want to start with the social media. And we talked about this in the pre-interview about the Facebook, which is the social media is just part of the entrainment of the New World Order to get you thinking one way, and that, you know, Christianity and conservatives and people believe in the Constitution are bad and crazy, and the one world government, New World Order, that kind of thing, which you're going to talk about in a minute. I want to talk about the Zuckerberg. You know, everything's fine as long as the campaign manager or top campaign manager with the Obama administration says they were on our side, Facebook. They let us do things that they wouldn't normally let people do. Everything's fine with that, but when Trump and his administration and his campaign people find a way to leverage Facebook for 50 million users, oh my gosh, aghast. Tell us how the social media basically fits in with the New World Order government and movement and one world government that you've been writing a lot about in the last few years. Tell me how that fits in. Let's start there.
Well, you know, it's actually really hard to tell where the social media firms begin and where the deep state ends. I mean, they're practically one and the same. And this has been true from the start. You know, a lot of these big social media companies ended up getting seed funding from the intelligence community through In-Q-Tel, the investment arm of the U.S. intelligence community. And what you see is that all these globalist confabs, I mean, you know, Bilderberg is one of the premier globalist confabs of the year, for example. I've been to a couple of them, obviously not as an invited guest. And what you see is you always have the leading executives of Facebook and Eric Schmidt of Google and Twitter and LinkedIn and Amazon and and Microsoft, of course, Bill Gates, another regular attendee. And of course, they all have memberships in the Council on Foreign Relations, and a lot of them involved with the Trilateral Commission and the World Government Summit that we're going to be talking about. They all come and give their little speeches there. And what you see is, and this is becoming clearer, I think, even just in the last few weeks, is they are undergoing a systematic campaign to censor, to silence, and to sideline conservatives, Christians, libertarians, people who say anything that contradicts the agenda. I mean, we saw a massive purge just in the last few weeks of YouTube channels. We know Facebook has been manipulating their algorithms to censor conservatives so that the stuff doesn't get trending. And this is across the board on all these social media platforms. And what's happening here, they serve a dual purpose. On the one hand, they help spy on not just the American people, but people all over the world, map out all the relationships, people's views, people's ideas, and you also control what they see. And some of this has even come out. The Facebook, for example, was working with the military on a social experiment where they were trying to check out people's reactions and psychological manipulation to putting, content that makes you happy or content that makes you sad. This stuff is, way out of line, and we need to resist it, I think.
I was out last week, and I talked about this in my weekly news wrap-up last week about how any email with Greg Hunter on it ends up in people's a trash can or in their spam file. And after I put that out, I had a couple of dozen people say, hey, you were right. I found your thank you note or an email with your name on it or a story with your name on it. It's unbelievable. Really quite unbelievable. The health rates, just to back up what you said about the purging, the Health Ranger, what is it, Natural News, 1,700 videos, poof, bye, gone. Unbelievable.
Yep.
Let's talk about this. A lot of people seem to think, and still seem to think, that this New World Order type government is just a myth. But that's not true, according to you. You've actually gone to some of these things. You didn't go to the most recent one in the Middle East, but you wrote extensively about this World Government Council, New World Order, whatever you want to call it. I believe they call it the World Government Council. Let's talk about that. That just happened in February. Nobody in the mainstream press covered that, and it was a huge event. So it's not a myth that they're working towards a one world government.
That's right. It's absolutely not a myth. And in fact, if you listen closely, they tell you what they're doing. People can go on YouTube, just type up in the search bar George Bush New World Order, and you can listen to him tell you what the New World Order is. He says it's a world in which a credible United Nations will use its peacekeeping role, by which of course he means its military forces, to impose the vision of the UN's founders. And we know the UN's founders, mass murderer Joseph Stalin. On our side, of course, we sent Alger Hiss, who later was convicted of being a spy for the mass murderer Stalin. They're pretty clear about what they're doing. If you get David Rockefeller's autobiography, I mean, he wrote this himself. And, the old joke about David Rockefeller, why didn't he run for president? Well, he didn't want a demotion, right? I mean, this guy ran the Council on Foreign Relations, steering committee of the Bilderberg. I mean, this guy was super globalist. And he wrote in his book, page 405, you can read it for yourself, he describes himself as a conspirator conspiring with a secret cabal of internationalists, he says, working toward a one world political and economic system. One world, if you will. And he says, if that's the charge, I'm guilty and I'm proud of it. So these people are openly telling us what they're doing. And this World Government Summit, this is the sixth one they've had now, takes place on the Arabian Peninsula, where I've spent some time. And it's all out in the open. You're right, it didn't get any coverage in the American media, even though Sky News, for example, and CNN and some of these others have co-sponsored this event. Nobody mentioned a peep about it in the American media. But you had the heads of all these different UN agencies, the head of the IMF, the head of the World Bank, top globalists and executives from the social media companies, government officials, very, very senior government officials. Last year, you had the new head of the United Nations there. So this is serious business. And they told us what their agenda was. I mean, they came out with an official press release afterward and said we need to realign all our institutions to get ready for the New World Order. And again, they've already told us what the New World Order is. Bill Clinton told us that he agrees with George Bush's view of it and vision for a New World Order. So, it's not even a conspiracy theory anymore. One, because it's not a conspiracy. By definition, a conspiracy requires secrecy. These people are practically in the open now. And two, it's not a theory. I mean, it's a fact. You can't argue with the fact that these people say these things. They're openly promoting this agenda. It's just they haven't told the American people yet.
They haven't told the American people because, according to your article that read, it was back in, I think it was beginning of February that they had this out. Bravo for your article, incidentally.
Thank you.
That the target is America, and the numero uno target is President Donald Trump, who says America first. Talk about that.
Yeah, and this has come through loud and clear for a long time now. For many, many years, they've made clear that America, as we patriots understand it, this idea that the self-evident truth that our founders outlined. They said we're all created equal and we're all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's not going to fly in their little vision of a new world order. So they need to eliminate that idea, and they make very clear that they're coming after that. What we see in their actions and what we see in their words is that they're trying to break down this idea of America. And in fact, very high-ranking people in the U.S. government recognize this. Rich Higgins from the National Security Council wrote a memo explaining it to Donald Trump, and apparently Trump was a fan. But if you look at this World Government Summit in particular, if you look at the statements that were made by the speakers and by the organizers, it's very clear that their vision for a new world order is totalitarian to the core. And it's very clear from the guests that they invited that our vision of America, the land of the free, where we all have God-given rights and government exists, as our founders said, to protect these rights, to secure these rights, that's not going to fly. And they did have a few Americans there, but no patriotic, Constitution-loving, liberty-loving Americans. They brought, for example, Robert De Niro, who said, I come from a backward country full of ignorant hillbillies, and we used to be governed by science, but now we're just governed by ignorance. And they really can't stand this whole agenda articulated by President Trump, that we're going to put America first, we're going to stop globalism, we're going to get out of these multilateral so-called free trade deals that undermine our sovereignty. You can tell they're freaking out about it, and it came through very, very clear in the speeches at the World Government Summit most recently.
Yes, we're governed by science, where I can put on a dress and go into a woman's restroom and be a woman. Oh, and if I think it's creepy to have like an 8-year-old girl in the men's restroom with me, and I think that's creepy and I don't want that, I'm some sort of a freak.
Yeah, and that's where they are now. I mean, they talk about science, but really they hate science. They hate objective reality, and they make it clear in this thing with the genders, right? They're trying to convince us that if we don't accept that there's, I think Facebook has 68 different genders on their little drop-down menu. They're trying to convince us that if we disagree with this, and this is an objectively provable, demonstrable fact, right? Every cell in our body has chromosomes in it that will tell you whether you're a man or a woman, and there's nothing in between, right? And
That's
yet
right.
we're being told that if we point out this fact that we're bigots or that we're haters or whatever. I mean, it's so ludicrous. And you see the same thing in every area of life. The global warming hoax. I've spent a lot of time traveling to these UN conferences, and they're in many ways very similar to this World Government Summit. In fact, at the UN Summit in Cancun, I think this was in 2012, they literally opened it up with a prayer to Ixchel. And the head of the UN conference at that time, Christiana Figueres, said it was the Mayan goddess of creativity. And so I whipped out my computer and I looked it up. Turns out it's the goddess of war and human sacrifice and cannibalism. And if you look at the World Government Summit, last year they met under the Arch of Baal. And anybody who's read their Bible knows that, Baal was a big fan of child sacrifice as well. So these people are just creepy to the core. And to me, it's bizarre that they're coming out of the closet now.
Which brings me to Ephesians, 6:12, where we are, I don't know the entire verse, but we're at war with evil, basically.
Wrestle not against the flesh, but against powers, principalities, the spiritual rulers of darkness in high places. That's exactly right. And that's what's going on here. I mean, I think if you miss that part of it, you miss the point, right? Because, we can see the individual globalists, people like David Rockefeller and George Soros and all the rest of them. But, if you missed Ephesians 6:12 part of it, the spiritual component of this, you really don't understand what's happening. And that's my personal view, but I think that really offers the best explanation for what's going on. And how else do you explain globalists meeting under the Arch of Baal or opening, a UN summit with a prayer to the goddess of cannibalism and human sacrifice? I mean, it doesn't make sense if you look at it in any other way.
And if you say, hey, abortion is not a choice, it's infanticide, it's basically Baal worship because you're destroying children. It's that sometimes you're just backward thinking. You're not progressive. I'm like, what?
That's right.
Or what is it? They have rational gun control. In other words, if we don't believe in what we believe, common sense, common sense gun. So if I don't believe in you, that's where they argue. Then I'm not reasonable. So tolerance. In other words, I don't tolerate I'm intolerant for not tolerating what you think is right. It's just the way they argue is that you're bad if you don't believe in what we believe in.
That's right. And then, speaking of the deep state and this weird stuff that they're into, I just did a big special report on the deep state. I hope people will get a copy of it. It's over at thenewamerican.com. And one of the elements that I focused on was the Bohemian Grove. And, this ties directly into Trump and the rest of it. So 2,500 of the most powerful men in the world, only men, of course, get together in the redwood forests of Northern California at the Bohemian Club. And, Alex Jones, love him or hate him, he's done some excellent investigative journalist work. And he snuck in there with a camera one year through the forest and filmed these people. I mean, he's got it on camera. You can watch it on YouTube, at least until they delete his channel, doing this bizarre ritual. I mean, they're standing in front of this 40-foot stone owl that many experts have said probably represents Moloch, also, a biblical demonic god who demands child sacrifice. And, they've got this, what they say is a human effigy at the bottom of the owl, and they're doing these weird chants and wearing these weird robes. And, this is the most powerful man in the world. This is every Republican president since 1920, with the exception of Donald Trump, has showed up at these Bohemian Grove events. And, clearly there's something very shady going on where the elites are into very, very weird stuff. And, regardless of what your worldview is, you have to take these facts into account if you want to come to sensible conclusions.
So we give some people some hope because I don't want to be all on give up and the message of give up and don't there's nothing can be done. Something is being done. Do you think that there is a Trumpian counterattack going on now against these people? After all, the U.S. still has the most powerful military in the world, and the power of the presidency cannot be underestimated. Look what it did for Barack Obama. Is there a counterattack going on? Is there hope for the world?
I think there is. I mean, look at me. I'm as hopeful as could be. I'm as optimistic as could be. Sometimes people call me a pessimist, but they're wrong. I could not be more optimistic. And, the nexus with Trump is absolutely clear. I mean, if you look, even this Bohemian Grove that I just mentioned, somebody hacked into Colin Powell's emails, and this all came out, I think, last year or 2016 even. And Colin Powell had told his friend Peter MacKay up in Canada, "Hey, I sat next to Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister of Canada back in the day, and everybody at the Bohemian Grove agreed that Trump is going to be a disaster, so we're going to vote against him." And as far as I'm concerned, that's the best possible endorsement he could get, is to have these globalist New World Order creepy types come out hating on him. And what we see is consistent. Newt Gingrich went on Fox News and said, "Oh man, the elites hate Trump because he's not part of their little secret societies." And what's happening now, Trump kind of plays dumb sometimes, but he knows a lot more than the American public realizes. And
yeah, I believe that. I want to kind of out you. I'm sorry, but and I don't mean out you like in a bad way, because I want people to think, because everybody thinks the snowflake generation is just a bunch of stupid kids. Well, and not so stupid. I mean, you're 31 years old, and you speak like you're 61 years old. You're one of the few people I would say, wow, a real journalist. And I worked for 2 networks and 5 TV stations. I don't know if that makes me a judge, but I've been in it a long time. And I want to be objective. Sometimes the objective truth is just pretty negative.
It is. I appreciate it very much, Greg. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I am technically a millennial, and I say that very hesitatingly. I know everybody has an image of stupid millennials who still live in the mom's basement, but we're not all like that, right? There's a good number of us who have woken up, and more of us are waking up every day.
Well, what they want for you guys is pretty awful. I mean, pretty awful what they want for millennials. If they knew what they were biting into, it's a poison apple. But I want to talk about some of the stuff that you have coming up, and that I want to kind of put out there. You don't have to give me everything, because I want people to come and read your work. But this whole thing with this school, which I've brought up, they have the thousands, hundreds of high school kids, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, organizing these big things, which is totally bogus. It's George Soros, it's MoveOn.org, it's totally, it's the teachers union, it's all orchestrated, for, thought control and entrainment, and some kids are refusing to get involved with it, which I think this is going to be a huge backfire for young people, because they're being forced to do this. Tell me about this latest push to disarm America through the youth of America.
Yeah, well, it seems that they think they find, they smell blood in the water, and so they're all, swarming around like sharks. But I think you're right. I think it will backfire. But you mentioned Soros and MoveOn. You are absolutely right. I mean, this is the very definition of an AstroTurf movement. I mean, if you look at the March 14th walkout, for example, they admitted this was organized by the Women's March, the youth branch of it. It's called Empower. And if you look at the partner organizations of the Women's March, you have the Communist Party USA. You have Planned Parenthood. They butchered 325,000 babies last year, if I'm not mistaken. And for them to come out and claim they care about dead children, I mean, talk about ludicrous. You have all these, I think somebody wrote that 100 groups that are partners with this Women's March are funded by George Soros. You have Every Town for Gun Safety, funded by Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire former mayor of New York. So this is nothing but an AstroTurf movement. Yeah, there are some traumatized children out there that are being manipulated, but there is powerful forces behind this movement.
And I want to, some people have gone on and dogged me about calling the Democrats communists, but I don't know what else to call them. I forget this. I have this new show called Let's Call It What It Is.
Right.
I mean, they're for universal basic income redistribution. They're for Antifa, communist. They're for Black Lives Matter, communist. They're for, income redistribution, communist. They're for communists. I mean, what George Soros and the like, we're talking about an attack by communists against America. Am I wrong?
You're absolutely right, Greg. And if you go back, I read the Communist Manifesto the first time, I think in 9th or 10th grade. And even back then, I remember thinking like, hey, some of this stuff sounds familiar, right? Like the government should educate all the children. We need a heavy progressive income tax, a strong central bank with a monopoly on currency and credit. I'm like, where do I know this stuff from? And unfortunately, we are now at the point where a significant segment of the American population, especially my generation and younger, could quite properly be identified as communist in their worldview, in their beliefs. And they don't even recognize this. I mean, if you ask ask them, do you prefer socialism or communism? Half of them will tell you socialism, but it's because they're totally ignorant. They've been indoctrinated, and education is one of my specialties. I've written very extensively on it. They've been so thoroughly indoctrinated by the time they go through 12 years of government so-called education that they come out literally believing communist dogma as if it were truth. And it's a major problem. Now, the truth is powerful, and a lot of these kids do wake up once they're confronted with the truth. But as of now, until they're exposed to the truth, they are indoctrinated through and through with this communist propaganda. And let's call it what it is. I love what you said, Greg. We need to call it what it is, and that's exactly what this is.
Isn't there a whole generation of kids behind your generation that is sick and tired of had it up to here with the communist propaganda, that they're turning conservative in droves? Is that true? Have you heard that?
Absolutely, and I think that's fascinating. Actually, here in the local area where I'm staying at the moment, there's all these super conservative, liberty-minded, libertarian teenagers who are, getting active in the Republican Party and getting active in politics, and they are super duper attuned with liberty, the Constitution, the truth, and it's really encouraging to see. And I saw there was an article not too long ago. CNN has been trying to chase down all the alternative media and get rid of all their advertisers and all the rest. Somebody did an analysis, and their average viewer is something like 60 years old, whereas some of the alternative media, their age group is 28, 26, 24. So there is, I think, a huge awakening among people of my generation who are getting in the internet. And young people kind of have this natural tendency to want to rebel against the dominant culture. So now the dominant culture has become this PC, communist, politically correct, silly stuff. And so a lot of them are turning conservative just as their little form of rebellion. And so there's a lot to be encouraged about, I think.
That was just going to end it there. Your promo what you're going to be talking about in the future on wherever you're going to be talking about. I know you write for several people. WND. Who else here? Let me make sure. The new. What is it here?
The New American Magazine.
Yeah, yep. New American Magazine. What do you have coming up? What should people be looking for, and where should they be looking for it?
Well, I'm doing a number of speeches still across the country. I'm speaking at Trump clubs. I've got a speech coming up in Salt Lake City, so I'm exposing the deep state. We've got another big project coming up on education. I'm working with some of the best people in this field, Lieutenant Colonel E. Ray Moore, Dr. Duke Pesta, and we have a major project underway where we're going to be trying to wake parents up to protect their kids from this indoctrination. So we're going to have a book coming out, booklets, speaking tour coming up next year, all kinds of important information that parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, all of us need to know this, because and this is what I think is the crux of the issue, Greg, is if parents don't understand that their kids are being indoctrinated by the schools, we're going to lose on all the rest of the issues. So I hope people will check out what we've already done on education and what we're going to do on education, because I think this is one of the central issues. If we're going to reclaim our liberties and keep our country, we must focus at least part of our time on this crucial issue of education.
Alex Newman, I took a chance by having you on, and you blew it out, my friend. You're the real deal journalist of the future, which is today. I appreciate you coming on. If you do a good book, please keep usawatchdog.com in mind. We will have you back if you're willing. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much, Greg. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex Newman. Thank you so much for coming on usawatchdog.com.